we're looking at the lab sector now, what a fascinating year it's been for diagnostic laboratories, from feast to famine, I guess, and really a sort of change in relationships and a change in where they are in the ecosystem. We've got a great panel. They're all virtual. I have on my left here, I've got Wolf Kulpat, who's Chief Executive of Amedis. In the middle here, I've got Michael Boehmer, who's Chief Executive of Unilabs. And here, I've got Evangelos Kotsopoulos from Sonic Europe, who's head of Sonic Europe. So, three of the largest lab groups in Europe. And what a year you guys have had with COVID. And I was just looking at Sonic's full year results, and the revenue was up 28%, wasn't it? EBITDA up 81%, I think. Extraordinary results. So I think we're going to start really by looking at the impact that COVID's had on the sector, and then go on from there to look really at what opportunities they see going forwards, and where society is heading with diagnostics more generally as well. So let's start with looking at how COVID has changed the sector, I suppose. I mean, has it had a really big impact on how you relate to public payers and government? And if so, how? I mean, Evangelos, what's the effect of COVID been on you? Well, not on you, but on Sonic.
Yeah, I think both of it is interesting. Can you hear me all right, Max?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, can you turn down?
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a first to be on your stage, so that's an honor. And thank you very much for having me with two colleagues. So it's had a big impact on everybody. I think first and foremost in terms of workload and being thrown in at the deep end of a crisis no one really quite saw coming. But the specific answer to your question, I think, frustratingly, is it depends a bit on which countries we're looking at. In terms of this relationship with governments, other regulators, the military sometimes, crisis control groups and others, we have really been confronted with situations where in some countries, governments were finding out for the first time that there are actually labs in their countries. In other countries, they actually realized pretty quickly that there is existing high quality, capable infrastructure which can be used and worked with to ramp up capacity very quickly. And haven't we seen with hindsight now that in those countries where that ramp up happened fast and at high quality level with large capacity, especially the first and second waves, really turned out to be a little bit less dramatic than in some other places. So we did play a role in that. And I think in some countries we formed very good, very trustful relationships with governments. In others, it's been a little bit more difficult. And now that we're sort of a year and a half into this whole pandemic and into the whole problem, I think the whole work and how we work with these kind of counterparts has professionalized, has normalized quite a bit. Yeah, I'd probably summarize it like that.
Has it changed your access to government and to the public payer? I mean, in a sense, I suppose in Switzerland and Germany, you probably weren't seen as an outsider as you might have been in, say, an NHS country like the UK. But has it changed your relationship with government and public payers?
Well, if you ask specifically for those two countries, we've always been somehow on the radar of government, but it was more the classical regulatory topics you discuss. You know, a new screening program is put in place for, say, HPV cancer screening. Yes, we are consulted. What do we think about it? How can it work? But it's not quite the minister or the chancellor who asks that question. Whereas in this current pandemic, I think the contact and the direct contact and the interaction happens at much more senior levels, and it has a speed of execution of things happening which is unprecedented, because as we all know, sometimes frustratingly, when we talk about regulatory topics, putting a new test, a new method into reimbursement, making regulation open for innovation, these kind of, it can take, we're counting years in a good case. Years and years pass until something changes and happens. And here we were talking days. So that's certainly something we have observed in a positive way.
So yes, so the regulatory things were long term, and then also frustratingly sometimes, you know, you would have very little visibility possibly on a tariff change in many countries, and so the tariff would change, and you really wouldn't necessarily know until a few months beforehand. And I guess that's still going to be the case, isn't it? You're not getting more conversation. Is there a more general conversation, I suppose, is what I'm asking, that's going to stay?
Well, probably
you
not.
don't know that there is.
The more general, I think, remains to be seen. I think these fee reforms, fee cuts, fee changes, I think that's one of these eternal fascinations of our sector. It's a part of it. It happens everywhere. It happens regularly, every few years. I think in most, at least in most Western countries, in Europe, in North America, in Australia, that is happening in a fairly rational way. It doesn't typically happen overnight. I mean, we're having reform discussions in several countries. Often these discussions also take years, and you sort of know which way it's heading. With COVID, it's been different. Obviously, things had to be implemented almost overnight in some cases. And there, I think governments were looking for people to talk to, industry groups. So Wolf Kuppert and myself, we are on the board of the German group, for example. I'm working closely with the Swiss group. People found out pretty quickly where they can go to get rational, reliable, honest information. What works, what doesn't work, is pooling a good thing or a bad thing? What does this whole sensitivity, specificity thing mean? What does it mean? What about rapid tests? Is that any meaningful thing? How do we screen school kids when they come back from the holidays? I think they have found people and bodies to work with in a very fast way, and that's benefited us too.
Mikhail, do you agree? I mean, how's it been for you at your uni labs? I mean, you're obviously covering a very large number of countries, so you must have that very breadth of experience. How's the relationship changed?
Yeah, and I think it's a valid point that Evangelos mentioned. There's always country differences, but if I add to what Evangelos says, Unilabs is maybe slightly different from Sonic in its setup. More leading in smaller and mid-sized countries where clearly you get very close to governments in situations like these. So we have gained a lot of improved contacts with the officials, and like Evangelos says also, you get a direct line to the Minister of Healthcare very quickly if you operate in these countries. So in a way, we also have a strong role in the associations there, and therefore also a role to play. So it varies a bit from country by country, but in general, the monitoring of variants is very important. We activated our data for various governments to track regional where outbreaks were happening, or the number of positive cases were happening. We even helped in some countries with vaccination programs. So if you have these stations to do your PCR swabbing, we also activated some vaccination activity. So we did what we could with many governments, which gave us a much nicer position, I should say. And we are collaborating much more. And like Evangelos says, we have now a clear position in these markets, which wasn't there before, because people know the value of diagnostics.
And they know who you are, yes, which they
Yeah.
didn't before. Yeah. And Wolf, how about you in Germany and Belgium?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to support what Mikhail and Evangelos just described, and it is, of course, like the pandemic itself, it happened in waves. There was frantic activity at the very beginning, and then there was another critical moment when all these variants of concern showed up, and very quickly we could show that we have the capability in our countries, and I speak here for Germany in particular, but also Belgium and Austria, to really set up the diagnostic framework to help governments take decisions. And that certainly brought us onto the screen, and that appreciation and the demonstration of our performance, the value to the healthcare system, that will continue beyond the current pandemic. Another telling sign for that is we have been consulted, obviously very quietly in some cases, about certain decisions government had to take at federal level, at federal state level, as Evangelos described, both of us, he and I, we sit on the board of the German laboratory physician association, and the build of trust and the back channels are really working, and we all look forward to keeping this alive. Obviously, heading into the general elections, Germany, we will have surprises probably along the way. But so far, so good, I would say.
So do you think this is going to mean that, I mean, I suppose you've got the example of COVID, and I suppose at one level you could say to the ministers, well, you know, you haven't liked, you know, all these old people in nursing homes have died because of COVID, you know. You do realize that every year they normally die because of flu, and that's been socially acceptable up until now, and maybe we could take steps to stop that from being socially acceptable and losing tens of thousands of elderly people every winter to the flu if we did a bit more testing there. I mean, so in other words, are the COVID mindset, is that going to extend out into other testing regimes covering other conditions, do you think? Looking forwards, or not? You don't really see much indication. There's not really much indication of that, is there, from a political perspective?
I do believe, if I may, the whole experience has sharpened the view and has sharpened the focus on microbiology and infectious diseases. Infectious diseases somehow seem to be a very, very boring subject, but now with COVID and all the publications and all the TV discussions about viruses and all sort of things has opened up this field to a lot of public interest, and of course this will die down quickly once the pandemic trickles out, but in healthcare decision maker circles, I believe the attention will remain. There's a lot more, and obviously there are experts predicting this may not have been the last one we have seen in our lifetime, so we better get prepared. So the value of having a healthcare infrastructure, including laboratories for microbiology and virology, infectious diseases, I think that's been recognized and hopefully will continue to do so.
That's been understood, yes. So I mean, looking forwards then. I mean, obviously, Amadis, you've traded, haven't you? You've been sold and bought, and I gather that that something similar might be happening quite soon to another one of our panelists. And which is interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of, and I mean, we've seen SynLab go to the stock market as well, haven't we? One of your competitors. So I suppose, I mean, if you were buying a lab at the moment, Evangelos, and I know you do buy labs, don't you? Quite frequently. How would you? I mean, you'd see a COVID uplift in their revenue, and how are you going to factor in? And a COVID profit. Are you going to, if you purchase a lab, how are you going to try and analyze that? How are you going to attribute value to that? I mean, how long do you think the COVID uplift will last, if you like, if you're buying a lab?
It's a good question. It's a touchy question, and it's relevant not only at the top end of the market where companies like Amadis and Unilabs and others trade and might or might not be sold, but also is relevant for smaller and add-on acquisitions. I mean, we executed quite a few deals right through the pandemic. In some cases, there was only the lockdown effects to be valued and to be appreciated. So we bought a couple of anatomical pathology labs in multiple countries, which are not really active in COVID testing very much, but of course they had suffered from the lockdowns, especially in the spring and early summer of 2020, and then you have to just make up your mind how quickly will they recover, and is there any lasting effects? What's the catch-up effects of procedures, especially in anatomical pathology where it's very hospital heavy, which have been delayed, screening, cancer screening, where catch-up has to be happening and is happening as we observe today. So there's a whole bunch of areas where we acquire. We did an imaging deal in Australia quite recently where it's more the negative effect of the last 18 months, which has to be analyzed, and I think that's a little bit easier to do than the positive effect, which we are currently all seeing in our P&Ls, and where we probably, I would look to the right here, expect that not all of this is going to stay forever. However, we do believe that in this combination of higher awareness, more formalized screening programs, awareness in the population, but also amongst governments, payers, regulators, that a certain percentage of this current testing is going to stay. It's going to be significantly less than what we do today or what we have done in the last 18 months. It'll probably also not be reimbursed or paid for at the prices it's currently being paid for, but some of it will stay. Especially on the more specialized level, when we look at whole genome sequencing, for example, variant sequencing and these kind of things.
Yes. But you haven't given any guidance really to investors as to what percentage you think Sonic can retain going forwards.
Well, we have multiple crystal balls sitting around our finance department, but none of them tells us what we would love to know ourselves. And it's the main reason, quite frankly, Max, why we haven't given guidance to the market. In 35 years of market listing, we have never done that before, and that's the main reason. We just don't know. Nobody does.
Yes. Wolf, what do you think? You've been sold now, so you can actually come up with what you actually think, can't you? And nobody's going to say, well, that Wolf Kupat was wrong. So what are you thinking it might be? Are we talking about another 10% over the next year, or I mean, where do you think?
I can tell you one thing, Max. It's been heavily debated, and we had a lot of very, very smart people outside and inside the company, best guessing how it would look like. And I can tell you the journey was, we were conservative in the beginning, and we underestimated the volumes and the financial impacts. And after a while, we were more bullish, and we overestimated, and then we underestimated again, and now we're overestimating again. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is, and whilst we speak here, we are in the middle of budget process for 2020 next year, and of course every country has its own dynamic, and I can primarily speak for Belgium and Germany, where we have strong positions in the market from peak, and that was the third wave in most countries, the third one. Now we are kind of in a fourth wave, at least in Germany, but the third wave was peak. From peak to trough, I would guess, and this is obviously my personal crystal ball, we will be able to keep somewhere between 20 to 25% going into next year, and after that it will trickle off to somehow from peak again to 15 down to 10%. It will not go down to zero. I agree with Evangelos. There will always be a remainder for all the good reasons, because the virus is here to stay, and somebody needs to monitor that. So there's scientific interest, there's healthcare system interest, there's individual interest, there's company interest. But from peak, I see COVID going forward somewhere between the 25 down to 15% range.
Right. Okay. So an uplift for your 2022 revenue in Germany of roughly maybe 15%, 20% on what you would have done before. Yeah. Yes. And how about you, Michael? Do you want to make any forecasts? No.
I expected the question to there as well. And as Evangelos says, it's a crystal ball. And clearly, of course, infectious diseases are here to stay, and there is a residual market, surely. And I think, when you hear the the range that Wolf was talking about, that's typically the range you also see in the market. There have been many companies forecasting already what would be the future. And I think the truth is always a little bit in the middle there. And I would take a little bit the middle road um, on that. So we're every time forecasting. I have to say, every month we get surprised with higher volumes than we ever could dream of, and it's still continuing. So it's very difficult to see how it's tapering off, or when it will be tapering off, and when it will then reach that residual stable point in the market. But what's for sure, it's infectious diseases are there to stay. We have a situation now where people do understand how important diagnostics is and monitoring is. Before the pandemic, we have been, all of us have been speaking about diagnostic only representing maybe 3 or 4% of cost of healthcare, and it's used in 70% or more than 70% of healthcare treatments. And now suddenly people understand it. So there's certainly a bigger role for us to play, which is great because it helps society to avoid bigger disease patterns. So I think we have a role to play, and it's a proud role to play also.
Let's talk a bit about the business models then. You've got a core. I mean, if you like, there's a core business model which is the core diagnostic lab business that you will run, and then it's like, how can you? Do you want to expand? I mean, you've expanded out of that, Michael, by buying into imaging, haven't you? You've expanded out of that at Amadis by buying clinician seats in areas like obs and gynae, and building a specialist doctor network at Amadis. So you're become a hybrid again. Evangelos, you seem to have stuck to your knitting, really. I mean, where do you see where are the expansion? Where do you expand beyond the core diagnostic lab business at Sonic, or do you?
Well, look, we have about 12% of the company in non-lab businesses. So we have a $600 million imaging division, and then the clinical centers, clinical services in Australia with more than 2,000 doctors in our centers. So for Sonic as a whole, that is a diversification and is a different mix. But you're right, in Europe, we have stayed in the clinical and anatomical pathology lab sector, and we quite like it there, I have to say. So there could be a geographical elements to expanding, but certainly, we don't quite see it as branching out into wildly different areas, even though, financially you could sometimes look at certain things, but we've seen a much higher interest from patients directly, or sometimes they're consumers, they're not patients who have an illness to cure. And the interest in the B2B segment has increased, and we have a very active and I think very successful position in that market here in Europe.
You're talking about a multiple tens of millions of euros consumer business in Germany alone, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah, we have invested in that area many years ago. We've built our own platforms. We have multiple sites where consumers can go book their appointments online, or if they don't wish to have it, have a consultation with a physician there on their results. And many of these tests which are being requested in such a format, of course, are tests which patients or consumers can understand and appreciate themselves, which is, if we are honest, a very small fraction of the many thousand tests on the menu of a lab. But when you think about infectious diseases, allergy, nutrition-related testing, general wellness, travel-related testing, there are many areas where there's a significant interest at consumer or patient level, whereas the appetite to go and sit in a GP's waiting room for an hour and a half is not so great. It's about convenience, speed, and when these tests have to be paid out of pocket anyway or are reimbursed through private health insurance, well, then you might as well go to the lab directly. So this is a trend we have seen for quite a while now. It's picked up to be financially meaningful. It used to be a bit of a fringe activity. Now it has become more relevant. And we do see further growth in that area. Other than that, I think where we do see very healthy growth at the moment, I'm not sure the others can perhaps confirm that, is where previously pretty separate disciplines are beginning to touch each other and merge. So where previously you had the traditional lab diagnostics Then you had an anatomical pathology somewhere, you had a genetics lab somewhere. These areas have moved together quite significantly, and they have become, visible and operating as one unit under one roof, and then often married by high-powered IT and bioinformatics. So when we serve a hospital today, we don't want to go there as a microbiologist or a geneticist or someone who can look at a biopsy or be presenting at the tumor board. You want to be doing all of those. And so investment into those more highly specialized areas for us has certainly paid off. And we quite like expanding further in those areas.
Into that area. And on the B2C side, have you got a website now where you can go and buy the test, or not really?
Is this a free marketing opportunity? Right? So yes, we do. So there's a landing page. You can go to Mein Direct Labor in Germany. You pick your city, you pick your appointment. Miraculously, there's always an appointment free on the next morning at 9 o'clock. I think that actually works quite well. So especially, especially in metropolitan and in city areas with lots of very well-educated people in certain age groups, we see a very significant uptake of these kind of services.
Man Direct Labor.
Mein Direct Labor.
Okay, good.
Come in, find out.
Okay. What about you, Michael? Where do you see the business model extending out to from imaging and labs? I mean, you could then say, well, okay, we're doing imaging and labs, so we can set up a diagnostics center with some primary care physicians in there, and so we can look after everyone's needs like that and go there? Or is that, I mean, that's something that's happening in Italy already, isn't it? I mean, is that where you see it going, or not really?
Yeah, exactly. We see that. We are a little of the three in front of you and on this screen a little bit different. We have almost 40% of our business coming from pathology and radiology in our company. And in most countries across the group, we serve with pathology, radiology, and laboratory to our customers. So basically, the expand idea that also Evangelos alluded to is really something that takes off. But more in the primary care environment, where you speak about, Max, that's indeed happening. Yeah? We have more this one-stop shop type of activities, especially in Portugal. It's really big. It's happening now in Spain, but also in other markets. So we see that take off for us, which is good. And for us, I think also post-pandemic, being in radiology and pathology is extremely important because there's quite some catch-up demand. We know the capacity is constrained in healthcare systems, so this catch-up demand will not be a V-shaped bounce back. It will be a continuous flow of incremental volumes over the next few years to work away the waiting lists that are there. So we have a role to play there with our digital pathology platforms and our radiology platform, which is also quite digitized with our doctor pools reporting in a digital environment together. So, yeah, I think from that perspective, you are right, Max. These things getting together, and like Evangelos says, indeed things are touching each other. Is it the integrated diagnostic holy grail that everybody spoke about years ago? We don't speak about that. We speak indeed about activities touching each other and naturally going together more and more.
So can you build so these digital solutions to help doctors to understand and interpret the results you send to them, these are very nationally specific, aren't they? It's very difficult to build such a platform. I mean, it'd be nice to build a platform like that across Europe, but you couldn't because of the regulations in different countries, presumably, which would stop you from doing that. Or is that not the case?
No, it is basically, in general, what you see in the market, in various markets, you see volumes going from hospitals more closer to the patients, more into the primary care networks, but even towards the direct patients and home care and home monitoring, and those activities you see more and more. So basically, if you go to the Netherlands, for example, it's very normal to do e-cardiology at the collection point. E-dermatology is happening there. You have your lab IVD, small radiology activities are happening already. and the same is true for the Iberian countries already. And in France, there's more restrictive regulations, of course, but there's also something like global trends and patient needs, and I'm sure that also the more difficult countries will follow slowly but gradually. But there's a quite chunk of countries that already are active in this environment.
Yes, thank you. And Wolf at Amedes, how do you see the future? I mean, you've got the new owner. Are you now? How's that going to affect things? Are you going to move the clinician model further out of Germany, Belgium, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Of course, the new owner, and as you are aware, it's actually it's not one new owner. It's a consortium of three investors, well known and well reputed in the field. So obviously they like what they see at Amides, and we are as a competitor to Evangelos and the Sonic Group. A lot of what Evangelos described applies to Amides as well, but there's one specialty. I mean, we're amongst the leading groups in IVF centers. And IVF centers, as you know, Max, have attracted a lot of attention across Europe in recent years. So we are building our position there. And the other thing is the half of our physician faculty in our network is associated with clinical medicine, working in specialized doctors' offices. So we are very closely looking at the COVID pandemic and the longer term medical needs. So we have formed a specialist group to look into the topic of long COVID in particular, and connecting clinical diagnostics with laboratory diagnostics. So coming from that, and as Michael and as Mangolos described, the various specialties in molecular analytics and clinical diagnostics, they move closer together. They depend more on each other as we learn more about the disease, and especially this topic of long COVID is still very early in its research and in its clinical understanding. But to add to what was described by the colleagues, this is an area where Amides is looking at, apart from continuing to build our hybrid model, as you described it, with clinical medicine and associated specialist diagnostics.
Yes, and are you going to do that? Are you going to stay in Germany and Belgium, or are you looking at taking that model into other countries?
No, we are obviously now with the new investment cycle, we are obviously actively looking outside of Germany. Our stronghold obviously is Belgium and Germany. We have bought, as you remember, a specialized, highly specialized lab for rare diseases in Austria. So we take a closer look into Austria as well, but we are more open with the new investor consortium and a renewed longer term horizon. We're very open to European opportunities as they present, but same as Sonic, we stick to our knitting. We try to do what we do best, and so Amides will always remain a specialized group rather than going too far into general medicine.
Right, specialized, yes, specialist doctors, and
Yeah.
okay. And the obs and gynae, the women's health
Yes,
side of
that's
things
the core. That's the
is
core.
a core business, isn't it? I guess.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just wondering if is anyone dying to ask a question? I'm looking out at the audience, and I'm just wondering, does anyone have a question on the lab sector? Nope. Nope. Well, we can come back to you and see if you've formulated one shortly. So, I guess. So, I mean, has this changed your relationship with suppliers to some extent over COVID? I mean, how's that changed, Wolf? have you?
I mean, it's very obvious, Max, and I think Evangelos mentioned initially there was an enormous operational stress on our supply chains and on our supplier relationships. So when the whole pandemic started, and then the second, third wave, shortages of all sorts of reagents and plastic materials and spare parts and machinery and so on. So the intensity of our communication and the level of problem solving, including some stress that has brought clearly changed the relationship. Now, I think it's fair to say um, suppliers have moved from just shipping stuff to labs to more strategic partners, trying to balance the needs of various markets. We had these shortages, high demands in the US, high demands in Asia. Suddenly, Europe came off a bit short-handed in some of the major supply chains. We are clearly, apart from enjoying a closer communication and a more strategic partnership, we are clearly looking at a balance, moving from the one single sourcing strategy to a balanced, maybe more multiple sourcing strategy, trying to prevent these stockouts and painful situations going forward. But this is early days. Max, clearly for me, supply chain has become a topic of far more attention than it used to be, because in the old days everything was there all the time. And we have now experienced the fact that this is not
Wasn't the
guaranteed
case.
in times like these. Okay.
So you're looking to Chinese suppliers, or looking.
Not necessarily Chinese. If quality is fine, if price is fine, if supply is guaranteed, why not? But I'm looking more towards a balanced strategic partnership, and that may not only be one supplier, but that could be more than one going forward.
Do you have the same feelings, Michael and Evangelos? What do you think?
Well, I do believe that, of course, this pandemic made things a little bit clearer. We all were in a stress, and some suppliers were disappointing, I have to say. And there were some that were extremely helpful. And when you remember, we were from Middle East to Europe to also Peru, active with PCR testing. We had various suppliers that were really helpful on that. And they're now dear to our hearts. And there's, of course, an opportunity for newcomers now. I think something's changed in the market where previously the European market was dominated by a few. But now it's not so strange to maybe look east or look to the United States a little bit better and go from a global perspective, because machines are good, technologies are good, the service was very good in some way. So I do not exclude us looking a little bit broader than we did before.
Right. Yes. And Evangelos, similar feeling?
Yeah, I think I'll share those observations. It's been pretty crazy last year, and we had to sometimes drive with personal cars to warehouses of people on Sunday mornings to be able to still test on a Monday morning. It was very, very extreme. But I think both sides, suppliers and labs, understood that circumstances were very extreme. And we also have to acknowledge and remember that some of these suppliers were put under extreme pressures by the governments of countries they operate in manufacturing. So there were risks and threats and sometimes real situations where shipments were confiscated and other things that didn't reach us in other countries. Now, I think we have benefited as a company from many, many years, and in some cases, and some large suppliers, decades of cultivating good relationships and trustful relationships. They didn't just pop up during the pandemic, and that has certainly paid off for us. The other thing which I think has served us well is a presence around the world, in Australia, in Western Europe, and in the United States, and that's always allowed us to improvise a little bit if we had to. And we did indeed take on board some new suppliers. Maybe not so much for the hardcore PCR assay as such, but shortages were faced in many other areas which are a little bit unexpected. Consumables, plastics, pipette tips, little racks and trays and these kind of things, which ultimately we had the warehouse full of assay, but we couldn't use it because plastic wasn't there. So in the middle of this, I remember, I forgot actually the names of these companies, but there was a supplier in the Netherlands we found, there was a small German mid-cap company which makes precision plastics. So suddenly within days, in some cases, we had prototypes formed and we were able to purchase really high-end quality controlled material, which also survives accreditation and quality management inspection. So there are some angles which are new, but I think I'd agree with Wolf. We don't want to have all eggs in one basket, and we certainly learned during this pandemic quite a bit who we can trust, who we can rely on, and in some other cases, which were a bit more disappointing, where marketing is a bit more pronounced and actual delivery was rather disappointing. It has all calmed down now, but we're still keeping a bit of stock, which is probably quite a bit above the levels we would normally hold for such a department.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. Any questions from the floor on the lab sector? So let me think. So the general. So the going forwards, do you think that the diagnostic sectors that how society that you know, where society is heading with diagnostics has changed, that's changed going forwards, and that role is expanding now, really?
Yeah. You know, it's not only related to the pandemic, I would say, what's happening. I think diagnostics moving closer to the patient was already happening for a while, right? Because it's better for turnaround times, better for cost. It's also better for medical treatment. So all very good stuff is around that part. So that continues. It's only accelerating, I think, and we think at Unilab. So also the more digital side. Before the pandemic, we were struggling with a lot of GPs that didn't want their results online or stuff like that. So a lot of paper was flowing, and then suddenly during the pandemic, paper became dangerous. So that was a very good solution, I should say. So now digitalization is really accelerating across diagnostics, which is good because
you don't do paper anymore, Michael. You're not doing paper anymore.
We do that in some cases because there's always some bastions that are difficult to convince. But the majority is really switching over, and you know, like we are now having this conference virtually, people are used to virtual things and Teams and Zooms and things like that. So I think it's more accepted.
I remember 18 months ago, I think Jos Lammers was saying, well, the problem with digital is that in doctors, in most outpatient doctors in Germany do not have the internet, or do not have internet of a quality which enables us to do digital with them, because they just don't. They don't have the bandwidth. There's no digital. You can't do it electronically. Has that changed? So that has changed. That barrier has sort of gone.
Yeah, I think any doctor practice in general without an internet connection today will not be in the business for a very long time, I think. I don't know if that was the case already 18 months ago or not, but I think it's very clear. Also, you know, patients and consumers alike, people want to be self-informed much more, and that mega trend is only accelerating now. And whether it will go like in the United States, where direct to consumer is taking a big flight in Europe as well, we have to see. I know Evangelos is successful. We have also some countries that are very successful in this. Let's see how it takes off. For sure, we'll be ready for it. And you know, last but not least, I think also what always was there before the pandemic was high quality demands. And I just took a part of one of the previous sessions in your wonderful conference which was a bit around artificial intelligence and things like that. I think the quality expectations are increasing much more, and it comes together with digitalization, and it comes together with more consciousness at the patient side, more demanding side. So I think around this environment going into the future, especially around radiology pathology, there's a lot of quality uplift coming. And I think the digitalization and the closer to the patient part of diagnostic will be very good for all of us, I think, and for the quality of healthcare in the years to come.
Yes, and you, of
I'd
course.
like to add, Max, if I may, I think just another perspective as well, like probably any good crisis, it has also sharpened the view and learnings about ourselves. And I can certainly say for us, seeing teams in the company, not teams, the online software, but our teams of people at all levels, whether it's medical specialists, scientists, PhD, IT people, courier logistics, admin people, how people performed in such a situation. There have certainly been people who rose to the occasion and who have really left a very long standing. But we have also learned a lot about our own infrastructure in our own company. I mean, the situation has been unprecedented for everybody, right through to very personal and family levels. But it certainly has also pointed out, where do we have to become better? Where do we have to invest more in better systems? Where is innovation, paying off, as we've now experienced during the pandemic, and where is it a bit wishy-washy marketing spiel, which maybe doesn't really have such a great impact. There have been, I can really say, great learnings for us on what we can do better and what has worked well so
Where does
far.
it pay off, and where does it pay off, and where is it wishy-washy?
Well, look, I have to say personally, and we've held that view for quite a while, in artificial intelligence, we see certain applications in imaging and anatomical pathology, in some algorithms which we're already using, which is really quite impressive. We are still waiting for the blockbuster innovation which turns markets upside down. So I think in healthcare, where we are surrounded by an extremely, and rightfully so, extremely conservative set of clients, clinicians, doctors, hospitals, I'm not sure whether this tsunami of apps and digital solutions for just about everything we do is actually really going to happen. It's very nice to do your appointment online and to see your GP on a screen to get a script for some medication, but that's sort of the easy end of town. I'm a little bit skeptical whether promises that revolutionary stuff is going to happen can really be held. We have certainly not seen very much of that really seriously executed during the pandemic.
Yes, I saw, Wolf, I saw you agreeing with that statement from Evangelos. Yes.
100%, 100%. There is not this one killer application that revolutionizes diagnostics or laboratory medicine or our fields of activity. It will be a series of small, highly targeted, very valuable, meaningful instruments for physicians, helping them with monitoring patients and getting to better clinical results. So it will be more of a cumbersome workplace, day by day, step by step, rather than boof, here is the big revolution and now everything changes in medicine. I don't see that.
You don't see that happening, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I was talking to somebody here who'd got an AI application to look at radiology images, and basically it is quantifying what the AI sees. So it is providing a broad interpretation of the image for a radiologist to look at, rather than saying, I'm going to replace you. It was much more about quantifying the results and interpreting the results, rather than saying, we're going to replace the radiologist in a specific type of image.
Yeah, well, I think that's the point, Max. It's if you use an artificial intelligence tool as a second reader next to a radiologist, you avoid the inter-observer variability percentage, and
Yes.
you increase your quality levels significantly. It's not to say that it will replace the doctor.
Okay.
And what Michiel, I think, just said goes to a point which will be critical for all of us for the years and years to come, and that's the shortage of specialists at almost any level of our companies, whether it's the medical experts, scientists, or other stuff, but particularly when you look at radiologists, anatomical pathologists, geneticists, the market's basically empty anyway. There are very few specializing every year in Europe, far less than labs in all shapes, in hospital, in research, in academia, in private labs would need. And so we are forced also to come up with tools to free up these specialists' time and give them decision support tools and all these kind of things. So I think this is going to be a big topic which is going to hurt us and torture us for a long time to come.
You're forced to do it. And do you see yourself going into training specialist doctors yourselves and sort of getting more
yes.
involved
absolutely.
We do that in almost all countries where we operate. We have increased to the absolute possible maximum the number of registrar positions we have in our labs, where doctors are qualifying and specializing in laboratory medicine, microbiology, and genetics, and in other areas in anatomical pathology. But it's not enough.
It's not enough. Okay. Fine. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you and goodbye.